My name is Sam. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency, and we offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed in your career. Before we get started, we will be taking questions at the end of today's webinar. You can find that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to leave questions as yourself or anonymously, and we will get to as many as possible at the end. We'll also be sending out a recording of today's webinar by the end of the day today, as well as posting it to the Fairygodboss site. So if you miss anything or you want to share this with a friend, you'll have the ability to do so. Here with me today is Rachel Braun Scherl, founder of Spark Solutions for Growth. Rachel is a growth strategy consultant, marketing expert, and a sought-after public speaker, as well as a trusted authority on leadership and entrepreneurship. Since co-founding Spark, she has built an international client base, and with her passion and commitment, has successfully launched, built, and revitalized companies around the globe, and has been doing so for over 20 years. Thank you so much for being here today, Rachel. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the Fairygodboss community for joining. And I have to say, I read the articles religiously, and I'm always quite impressed with how specific they are. I like to think of myself as a pragmatic strategist, so anything that really gives you ideas about how to do things differently. Well, welcome everybody. It looks like people are coming in from all over the world, which is exciting. As Sam said, my name is Rachel, and I do a bunch of different things, but today my focus is on Ready, Set, Grow, 5 critical skills you need to build your career. I wanted to start with asking folks to answer this question in the chat box. I was in a meeting last night and I thought it was so interesting. How would you describe where you are in your career and your life right now? Would you say you're in the seed stage where you're just, tilling the soil and getting going? Would you say you're in the growth stage where things are moving, you feel like you're on the right path? Or you're in the bloom stage where you're pretty much where you want to be? That's not to suggest that things are perfect, but that you see the path, you're close enough to the top of the mountain. So I'm seeing the answers come in: growth stage, early mid-career, getting started, deciding the seed stage, growth, trying to weed. I love that. Learning every day, picking up more skills. Terrific. So we have people, from what I understand, who are, from 5 to 25 years post-college in various stages of their career. And so what this is meant to be today is, if there was a Bible or some magical tablets that I had at the beginning of my career, I'm now decades into it, as Sam mentioned, what might I wish I had known? What might I wish people had said to me? Hello, Anna. Nice to see a friend on here. So what do I wish I had known? And please feel free to chat and ask questions in the box. Sometimes I'll occasionally jump in when something catches my eye and respond to the question, but we'll certainly have time at the end. And the objective is really for you to leave this 45-minute conversation with some ideas of skills that you might have that you want to develop, or skills that you don't have that you might want to improve upon. Okay, so what the first is, what am I doing here? I play a lot of different roles, as I'm sure so many of you do. The first one's most important: mother, wife, daughter, sister, friend, sister-in-law, niece, aunt, community volunteer, all the roles that I play in my personal life. As Sam mentioned, I'm a business builder. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm a marketing strategist. I love new ideas. I think of myself in my life, in my personal and professional life, as a problem solver. I love innovation, and by that I mean better, newer ways to solve problems. I happen to be of the school of thought that we're not coming up with any new problems necessarily. We're just coming up with better solutions, and I'm happy to talk about that in a little bit more detail. I'm a published author. As you can see, the book to the right, I published Orgasmic Leadership: Profiting from the Coming Surge in Women's Sexual Health and Wellness in 2018. And I am a vagipreneur, which is a person in the business of female sexual and reproductive health. As Sam mentioned, I've worked on business growth for a very long time. I've worked on women's businesses essentially from the tops of their heads to the tips of their toes. And for the past 12 or 13 years, I've been focusing on the space from menstruation through menopause. And that includes, as you might imagine, everything that you're probably experiencing for everybody who identifies as a woman, whether it's menstruation, fertility, infertility, birth control, disease prevention, incontinence, menopause, hot flashes, so the whole range. And one of the reasons that's become my sweet spot, as one of my friends coined, is because I think it's a hugely exciting area. When you're in marketing and you're in business building, you're always looking for an emotionally engaging category. And I've yet to find, working in hundreds and hundreds of categories, anything that's more emotionally engaging than sex and intimacy and our bodies and our body parts and what they do and what they're capable of. And one of the exciting things about being in this space for so long is we have the opportunity to create a category, a language. And this isn't just for small startups or venture-backed startups. I'm also working with large companies who have big established brands that you would have heard of, really figuring out how to better meet the needs, how to understand the insights. You know, you're a target audience for everybody. Strong, powerful women building careers, building lives. Everybody wants to speak to you. Everyone wants a piece of you. So you are one of the target categories, but it also spans a broader range potentially than the people on the call. And the term vagipreneur, I always get asked about that. I did not come up with it. It was created by this Ellen, who had interviewed us in my first company in the space for the New York Times. And we were describing what we did. And at that time, I was running a company where we had a product that improved arousal, desire, and satisfaction for women of all ages and life stages. So we were really in the arousal, desire, and satisfaction business. And she said, "Oh, I get it. You're a vagipreneur." And I loved it, and it stuck. And every time I said it, people sort of got it, or at least it got their attention. And a couple months later, I said, "Listen, this is a great name. You came up with it. You own it. But if you're not going to use it, I'd like to trademark it." So I did. So that's basically, I play many different roles, and I'm also very curious in the course of the conversation to hear about the many roles that you play. And depending on where you are in your life and whether you have kids and whether you're homeschooling or whether your kids are out of the house, obviously the demands on your time are very different and very personal, but all important to think about when you think about building your career and having to make hard choices about where to spend your time. So I had the opportunity years ago. I graduated from Duke quite a long time ago, and that literally is the graduation program, and my parents with me at graduation with my very big hair. And I remember thinking at that time that I was just going to follow, you know, the proverbial yellow brick road, and I was going to have a career and I was going to have a family. And what's interesting is I went to work for Johnson & Johnson, not right out of college, but after graduate school. And I remember thinking, and I think this is an important distinction, that I was going to run a division of Johnson & Johnson, which I always find interesting looking back, that I didn't say I'm going to run Johnson & Johnson. And I don't know if it was a lack of vision on my part, falling into maybe societal expectations, but I just thought it was interesting when I look back. In any case, I thought it would be pretty straightforward. You know, my life up to the age of 21 had been reasonably free of trauma and illness. So which was very lucky, and I thought that life just continued on this path. And then, as I'm sure many of you found, it really looks much more like this. Instead of a straight line, you're swerving and going in different directions and trying not to get hit by oncoming traffic. And what I always say is that my career looks linear in retrospect. I had a plan, and I will encourage you over the course of this conversation to have a plan, but also to be aware that there are so many factors at play that can get you off course. And I've seen in the chat, you know, COVID's a particularly great example. What if you had done all this work to build fill in the blank kind of business, a restaurant, a boutique gym, whatever it is? You would have had no way of anticipating that all the work and all the foundation that you laid and all the blocks that you built to get to this point where you can build this huge and successful company or realize your vision, that things would get in the way. Like family demands, like illness, like an international pandemic, like the bottom falling out of the financial markets. Fill in the blank, I'm sure we've all had hurdles that we've had to overcome. So I'd be interested during the course of the conversation if you would put in the chat some of the unexpected or expected challenges that you had that turned out to be bigger than you thought. Because I think it's so important to understand that one of your key jobs in your career is to be prepared for the unexpected. And the only thing that you can guarantee is that something unexpected will happen. And I don't know what it is. I don't have a crystal ball, but it could be any of a dozen things. Someone who you thought you were going to replace, bring someone in. You get fired, you get laid off, you get sent to another division. The person who was your mentor leaves the company goes bankrupt, the supply chain breaks down. That's something I've had a lot of companies experience, certainly during COVID. So when I talk about this, I started with my little yellow brick road. I started at J&J after business school. I had a life-threatening accident. I worked on female sexual health. I traveled the world for work, had kids, actually did a commercial, launched Hertz #1 Club Gold with O.J. Simpson before he got into the when he was still an international superstar and not either a potential person who got away with murder or a person who stole paraphernalia, memorabilia, and wound up in jail. Kids graduating, talking about sex, working with Kris Jenner, all a bunch of things that if you had said to me coming out of college on that day and that diploma ceremony, where would I be? I never would have predicted some of these. And some of these spots on the journey accelerated my career. Some stood in the way. Some knocked me for a loop. Some gave me the momentum to continue forward. Again, I reiterate this point because I don't really believe that I was prepared for the unexpected. And it was only after years of bumping into unexpected things and having to think on the spot about how to prepare for them that it's become something that I think about quite a lot. And in speaking with companies, I do a lot of speaking at companies, at conferences, at universities, at business schools, and to a person, everybody has an experience that they didn't expect and that they wish they had been better prepared for. So now to the meat. What do I wish I had known then that I now know? The 5 most critical skills. And this was really fun to put together because if you were to sit down and do this, over the course of a career, and again, I've been working for quite a long time. I have adult children. So I've worked throughout their whole lives from the day they were born. And there's just so many lessons, and there's lessons every day. So I don't want to presume that this is the only list and that it's only 5 things and this will work for everybody, but that I hope that you take something away, that there's something in here that you want to spend more time on because perhaps it sounded like something that you need to do and that you haven't done before. And I always say, I wish I found my best mentor. My first mentor was my father, who was, someone who I literally worshiped to the day he died, both personally and professionally. And it wasn't until about 10 or 12 years ago where I met a woman who I remember saying, I wish I had met her earlier. There's so many things that I can learn from her. And some of the things you'll see in here are things that I learned in the last 10 years. And some are things that I learned over the course of the early stages of my career. So the first one, you need a leadership voice. And we'll talk about all of these in a bit more detail, and we can focus on the ones that are of greatest interest. Relationship building and networking for business growth. I'm not a big fan of just going to events without any goal or purpose in mind, and we'll talk about that. The ability to negotiate. This is something that the stereotype is, or the characterization is, that women don't tend to be good negotiators. I want to dispel that and talk about ways to make sure that is one of the tools in your arsenal. Continuous learning, training, education of in-demand skills, understanding your industry. This is a constant process. As a business person, I think as a human being, I always feel like I'm on a quest to understand more, to make myself better, to be smarter about my industry, to be smarter about any of the skills that we're talking about, to deliver better client service, anything that's an better, stronger, faster, smarter, as we're going through our careers. And then the last one is keeping your eyes on the prize, path forward, expectations, and recovery. And I will talk about that as well. And I'm interested as we go through this, please chat, put in the chat things that you're the most interested in hearing more about, because I'm trying to consolidate my entire career of learning in 35 minutes. So I'll do the best I can with some of the highlights. Okay, now we see. So finding your leadership voice. This was something that I learned later in my career, and I just want to create some context. The first time I went into female sexual health was in 2008. I was raising money. Try to picture if you were in business at that time, that the bottom was falling out of the financial market. People were laying off employees left and right. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Tropicana went bankrupt. Stephen Barry's went bankrupt. Huge companies are going bankrupt. It was not a great time to raise money. And it certainly wasn't a great time to be a woman, or two women in our case, middle-aged women, my business partner, Mary, and I always say middle-aged, but now more so, going into Silicon Valley to raise money. And they considered us first-time entrepreneurs, even though we had built this successful business focusing on building large-scale brands and companies. We had never raised money before. So we come in as women. We all know the statistics about the percentage of institutional capital that's controlled by women, very small number, and the percentage of institutional capital that goes to women, even smaller number. And I say that because I like people to be really not pessimistic, but that's something you need to know. Certainly I needed to know when I was going into the situation to raise money. And long story short, we had 13 meetings in 2 days. We're meeting with venture capitalists, trying to raise money as women during an economic downturn. Oh, and by the way, talking about a business for vaginas, about arousal, desire, and satisfaction. So it wasn't like they were waiting for us with open arms saying, you know, bring on the vaginas, let's talk about orgasms, this is fabulous. So we go into the first meeting, and for anyone who's ever raised money or is thinking about raising money, each investment firm communicates that they have a different investment thesis or a different approach, but when you're doing 13 in 2 days, it becomes a blur, and you would swear that they just moved the same chirpy, cheerful person at the front desk from office 1 to office 2, and they moved the office furniture. You almost feel like these offices and these communities of investors are indistinguishable. So we go into the first meeting, and the first question we get, and just a little background, our product was a patented blend of botanical oils and extracts that was applied topically. It started to work in 5 to 10 minutes. And the belief as to how it worked was that it increased the sensitivity of the nerve endings so that you felt things faster, longer, stronger. So the first question is, how is this different or similar to Viagra? And we were, you know, we had the science, we talked about how the male sexual response is different. The male sexual response is more like a hydraulic pump. And basically the way the erectile dysfunction drugs work, they're vasodilators, which is they essentially increase blood flow to the genitals. The hydraulic pump works, we're off to the races. And then we would explain how female sexual response was so much more complicated, and it was this interconnection of physiological, psychological, emotional, behavioral, contextual, social, you name it, every part of our lives that came into whether or not we were going to be able to experience arousal, desire, and satisfaction. Okay, so I give that explanation, which albeit probably too detailed. And when you're trying to raise money, the most important thing is that you get enough interest from somebody in the room that you get another meeting. So it's not like you go there and then they give you that big check that they blew up on TV, but it's that you find a partner, you find someone in the room who's sufficiently interested to do the due diligence to have another meeting. So we thought the worst thing that could happen was that people would be quiet and ask nothing. Well, it turns out there is something that's worse, and it's that they're whispering and laughing. And I could literally hear people saying, oh, you know, remember my senior prom date? And, you know what I did, you know, in the locker room, and really incredibly professionally, and I would say personally inappropriate communication about sort of their sexual exploits. So we're stunned. I went to business school in Silicon Valley. I went to Stanford Business School. So I'm in these meetings with people I know who know people that I went to business school with, who are partners with people I went to business school with. And I'm just thinking, how could this be 2008? And I'm having this conversation where I'm listening to men whisper their sexual exploits, literally in a professional meeting. Meeting 1. We go into meeting 2, and the first question we get is what did you find out about male satisfaction? And again, long story short, we had done this pharmaceutical design clinical study that was placebo, double-blind controlled, 13 sexual health centers, ... just meant that we had done a high quality study. And the study said that it improved her satisfaction, arousal, and desire. And then anecdotally, as we shared with the people in the room, mostly men, was that we thought his satisfaction was a result of feeling like a more skilled partner or being happy about her enjoyment. And the study was done with heterogeneous couples in long-term relationships. Same whispering, same laughing. I never heard people talk about their senior prom so much since senior prom, which for me was quite a long time ago. And again, we're stunned. And we leave the meeting and we say, we have 11 more meetings. And Mary and I say, at this rate, this will feel more like a prison sentence than a business opportunity. And something made me look in my wallet and I had a $100 bill. And the only reason that's relevant is I don't carry cash. I'm a credit card person. I track everything. I could tell you what I paid on groceries in June of 2017, not that anyone cares, or gifts in December of 2002. So I track everything. And that's why I use credit cards all the time, a little bit compulsive. So I happen to have a $100 bill, and Mary and I look at this and we're like, well, this is divine intervention or dumb luck. And we come up with an idea and we say, we have 11 more. They can't go worse than they're going right now. At this rate, we're going to leave with no money. So we go in with our strategy and we execute. And I walk into the room with a $100 bill and I smack it on the table. And I said, here's a $100 bill. If anyone asks us a question about the category that we can't answer, this $100 is yours. If anyone makes a sexual reference that we haven't heard, then this $100 is yours. If anyone says a double entendre or sexual innuendo that makes us blush, $100 is yours. And then pause. And then I say, she likes it more, she wants to have it more. Let's talk about the business model. And the reason I give that background is because in that moment, in retrospect, that's where I found my leadership voice. And as the title of the book suggests, that's when I became an orgasmic leader. And the reason I say that is because in that moment, we had changed the dynamic, the energy, the tone of the conversation. We had basically said, we're here, we're serious business people to talk about a serious business opportunity for which you can make serious money. If you want to giggle in the corner, knock yourself out, but we're here, bring it on, we're not embarrassed. And I would have to say that that was such an eye-opening experience and one that got repeated and really set the stage for how I showed up in this space talking about sexual health and talking about things that a lot of people don't like talking about. And so when I say find your leadership voice, you have to be able to present and sell. I talk about this a lot, but ultimately any job you're in, any profession you're in, you're ultimately going to be selling something. Whether it's selling your idea to get a budget, whether it's selling someone who you want to come on your team, whether it's figuring out how resources from one department will get directed to yours. And it's also important if you want to progress in the organization. And I've done leadership seminars with people who have been in corporate America for 30 years and come with that perspective. And what they always say, and what I always say, is if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And you have to be in the room and you have to be in the conversation to make sure that things are happening. And people spend a lot of time building tactical, functional skills, which are important and which you need, whether it's finance or marketing or supply chain or operations, whatever it is. But I would argue that figuring out how you want to put all those together and present yourself in the world, in the business challenges and the life challenges that you have are critically important. So we could talk about this one forever, but in terms of the three things that I focus on, very straightforward. To find your leadership voice if you don't have one, and when I ask this question often, people are not sure if they had one or they haven't thought about it or they might have one and they didn't characterize it that way. The first is find people you admire. They could be people you know, they could be people you wish you knew, they could be people in your life, they could be people on TV. And now we have every resource at our fingertips. You can watch them, you can watch videos, you can listen to podcasts. And this one was easy for me. For me, it was always my dad and Oprah. My dad, I obviously had a lot of access to. about how to live, and he was a businessman for his entire career. And for me, Oprah was because she figured out the balance between context and content. And by that, I mean, she was just as believable opening up a school for girls in South Africa as she was hosting a party on a yacht for John Travolta's 50th birthday. And what I say when I say identify people you admire, figure out what it is about them that you admire, figure out what makes them impactful. In fact, the first article that I wrote that got any traction was how to find your leadership voice, because Oprah's is already taken. Determine your strengths. And I say this especially for women. Make a list of your strengths. And it's a gross mischaracter, it's a gross stereotype, but it's pretty easy to write the things you're not good at. But spend some time making a list of the things you're good at. And even more important than that, the things you're good at that you enjoy doing, to get a sense of how you would create the way you want to present yourself in the world. And as I said, I didn't learn this early in my career. I learned it, decade 2 or 3 into my career. So even if you feel like you have an approach, if it's working, great. If it's not, there's always time to revise and take a different path. And the last one is to practice. This seems so obvious. And I always use the analogy that an athlete doesn't go out in the field, for an Olympic tryout or to play in the Super Bowl, or if you're playing in the World Series like last night, like the Dodgers, without practicing. Why would you go into a situation, the outcome of which is important for your career or your life, without practicing? And that could be talking to a trusted friend. It could be filming yourself. It could be looking in the mirror. But whatever it is, the first time you go in to make that pitch, whatever it is, that it's the first time the words are coming out of your mouth. I like to talk about planned spontaneity. So it feels spontaneous, but you are very clear what it is you were trying to say. So that's number 1. Number 2, relationship building and networking for business growth. Feel comfortable blurring the lines. I referred to this woman that I met much later in my career, who's 25 years older than I was, and I had never seen a person so masterful at crossing the line between personal and professional relationships. And when I say crossing the line, I don't mean inappropriate behavior. I mean that friends could be business colleagues and that business colleagues can become personal friends. And she did it in a way that was so elegant and looked so natural that I thought, that's something that I really want to do. And how it's changed for me is I actually ask. If I have a friend who might have an opportunity, it's not that I use my friends as salespeople. It's in the right situation, when an opportunity strikes, I take it. Using your relationship and networking time wisely. So I mentioned that I've been a working mom, and in any career that you're in, I'm sure you can be invited to an event every night. Well, it used to be, you could be at an event every night in person, and now you're on a Zoom or 12 Zooms every night. And I had a rule that I came up for myself is, first of all, don't go into a room without doing research and figuring out who it is you want to speak to. You go into rooms of 200 people, it's not a good use of your time to just mill around. It is a better use of your time to see who's on the invite list or who said they were going, that you might have an interest in meeting for any number of reasons, because you admire them, because they're in a similar industry, because someone suggested that you meet them, whatever the case is. And then the networking time wisely, I always felt like doing events at night for me with young kids was hard. So I had this rule: if I was going, the second that I met someone who I thought I could follow up with and have another conversation, business related or personal related, I left. So I joke that if I got there at 7, I had a Diet Coke at 7:05, and 7:10, I met this amazing person. At 7:15, I'm out the door, because I feel like I've accomplished what I was trying to do. Otherwise, these events become a blur, and follow-up is really the most important thing in any of the networking. And I referred to this earlier, but ask. Ask if someone will spend 15 minutes with you. Ask if you can have coffee. And again, my reference is I haven't totally adjusted to COVID and the fact that we rarely meet in person anymore. But reach out to somebody and say, I met you at the Fairygodboss webinar and you spoke about this, and I'd be interested in speaking to you for 15 minutes. When people take the time to ask me a specific question, I always answer. And it's just good experience to get used to asking. and not feel like you're doing something wrong. Number 3, the ability to negotiate. And we're going through these fairly quickly, but I think we're often taught, or we see in perhaps political environments, that for one person to win, the other person has to lose. And from my perspective and my experience, the first thing is understand that you can learn to be a better negotiator. There are books, there are webinars, there are podcasts, there are people who have built entire careers on their ability to negotiate. Don't let the fear of the unknown be something that stops you. And then the second piece is there a way for both of you to win? Those are the negotiations where people walk away from the table feeling good. They might not feel like they got everything they want, but everybody has to walk away from a negotiation with something. I don't happen to be a believer of you grind the other person into the ground, and when they're crawling, begging for their life at the end, that's a successful negotiation. There are people who believe that. In my experience, I haven't found those to be effective, and I haven't found those to then be opportunities where you can negotiate and continue a relationship for the long term. And again, practice. It's obvious, it's straightforward. Do not go into a negotiation without knowing what you will say, without knowing how you will respond to what you think the other person will say. Role play. Do it with yourself. Play both parts. Have a friend do it. But never walk in without some idea. You don't want to be surprised. And no matter how prepared you are in life, if you try to plan for every eventuality, there still will be things that you miss. But at least give yourself the best shot of being in a position of strength when you're negotiating. Continuous learning, training, and education. This, I think, is self-evident. We are inundated with information. I consider reading and learning something I have to do every day. I constantly feel like I have to be meeting people in my industry to learn from. And if along the way I teach them something, that's great. But my primary objective is, what can I learn? How can I keep the conversation going? What is happening in my space? And it's as simple as I get Google alerts every day on women's health, sexuality, vaginal health, obstetrical care, anything that's in and around the space that I spend my time. And every day I'm reading articles. Meeting people in your industry, that was something I happen to work in a space that I believe is incredibly collaborative and cooperative, this space of women's health. And part of it is because we're fighting some common challenges. So there's a sense of collaboration, and that more voices push the agenda forward, and that a rising tide raises all boats. So during COVID, I'm not going to be going to any of these meetings. No one's going to any of these meetings. I'm not seeing a lot of great ideas. And you learn during this period of time. So I had this idea that I would create, not even a podcast, an interview series. And so I started this Zoom series called Quotes from Quarantine, where I focused on leaders in femtech, sex tech, and women's health for 3 primary reasons. One, it's the space that I live and breathe and sleep and eat and wake up and focus on again, and I'm passionate about it. 2, as I mentioned, we're not getting together in person, and I wanted to have a way to have interactions even in our new reality. And the last reason was because I find that the people who are attracted to this space over the course of my time in this space tend to be incredibly thoughtful, disciplined, problem-solving, insightful folks. So who better to get some advice on how to survive and thrive during COVID than people in this industry? And so that included entrepreneurs, it included people running established brands, it included investors, it included academics and healthcare practitioners. And I thought that I would do 10. Last week I did number 120, and it's turning into a podcast. And I learned an incredible amount. I met people in an industry where I feel like I'm pretty well on top of it and really make an effort to know what's happening. And amazing. I've had the opportunity to work with them or refer work to them or continue to have conversations where I can be inspired. So when I talk about this, there's many different ways to do it, but just like I think finding your leadership voice is an ongoing process that you should have in the course of your career, no one ever failed because they were too knowledgeable. no one ever failed because they spent, too much time studying. I think it's just really important to make sure you're well versed and that you have the skills that you believe your chosen career require, or that you're speaking to people who have the careers that you want to emulate, and understand what skills those are, and then go and get them. And then finally, keeping your eyes on the prize, path forward, expectations, and recovery. So in my experience, everything costs more, takes longer, is harder, is more expensive than you thought. And so there will be setbacks, there will be disappointments, there will be failures. And we often hear in leadership conversations, we've heard there was a trend in Silicon Valley where they only wanted to invest in people who failed. And I spend time thinking about that because failure's hard. I've certainly done it. I've probably done it a few times this week or even today, or certainly this month. But what I got to is that the reason failure is important is because it matters what happens after. And I don't know how many folks were obsessed with the Olympics, but I used to compete in figure skating, probably because I saw the 1976 Olympics and I wanted to, be like Dorothy Hamill. Scott Hamilton was a very decorated, awarded skater. There was a certain period in the 80s where he never lost a competition. He won a gold medal. He was a commentator. He was a professional skater. But what he also was and still is a cancer survivor. He's on his 4th bout of cancer, and he was adopted as a young child and he was sick. He talks about how his life didn't start out with success, painted on the wall, that was someplace he says, I have fallen down 41,600 times in the course of my skating career. And what's more important is I've gotten up 41,600 times. And that to me is such a good model to have in your head. You will fall. Plan for what you're going to do when you get up. When your back's against the wall, and my dad used to use all these sporting analogies, but when it's the 7th inning, when it's the last quarter, when you're in overtime, what are you going to do? How are you going to get yourself up? Number one. And number two, how are you going to re-energize yourself and figure out what you need to feel whole again, whether it's more sleep or whether it's better nutrition, or, I found at the beginning of COVID, if I read one more article where 70 people have cut out sugar, they're standing on their heads, they're doing yoga, they're meditating, all of that is fabulous. I've never found a way to put all of those things in my life at the same time. But I have found things for me that help me feel better and help me recover. I had talked about my dad being my first role model and idol. And I was one of 2 girls. I guess we thought we were athletic, although my kids laugh at the thought of that now. And so we watched every sporting movie under the sun, every Come From Behind, every training movie. When my son was young and he wanted to watch, the new Sylvester Stallone Rocky Balboa movie, I said, no, you can't. We have to watch Rocky 1 through 5, and then we can watch 6. But our very favorite movie, my very favorite movie, which really relates to how I think about life and how I think about getting up when I've fallen or getting up when I've been pushed, is this movie called Rollerball, which was a cult film in the mid-1970s. And it starred a guy by the name of James Caan, who in his day was a movie star. And the premise of the movie was very violent roller derby. So there were men on motorcycles, their tires had spikes. There were people on roller skates who wore gloves with spikes on them. And the objective was to get this very dense, solid silver ball into the bullseye. And, obviously it doesn't sound like a Disney sports movie. And one of the things that the referee said before every match is no timeout, no substitution. And in rollerball, the way the rules of the game were, you played to the death. So we shortened that which sounds sort of morbid. And I don't think you should work yourself to death. So I want to put that out there. So we took in my family this idea of no timeout, no substitutions, of how you live. And the way my dad translated it for us, and the way we've translated it over the years for ourselves, is people are counting on you. You have to get in the game. It's not that you're not part of the team, but you have a job, you have a role, you have a set of responsibilities, whether it's in your family, your community, your career. And people need you to get out and do the best you can. And you need to do it as efficiently, as effectively, as energetically as you can until you can't do it anymore, and then come back the next day and do it again. And my dad also expanded that to, how you live and how you love, that the people who count on you, there is no substitution for you. And that you needed to show up in your life, however you define that, and be present. And that includes when you got knocked down, or one of these skaters with spikes, pushed you, or you got fired, or you didn't get the promotion you wanted. And this to me is as critical as any skill. And I start with the premise that we will all fail. Could be big, it could be small, it could be life-changing, it could be devastating, it could ruin your finances, it could be an accident. The number of horrible things that could happen are endless. But what is important is the choice you make as to what happens to you at that moment when it's time to step back up. So, key takeaways, and hopefully you'll remember some of these, hopefully you'll find them useful, is that you have to commit to your career. Everybody who's in this community has a career that they care about. Focus on your own development. Don't assume that where you are is where you will be. You can continue to grow, you continue to learn, you continue to expand, you can continue to challenge yourself. Find an informal board of advisors, friends, colleagues, siblings, cousins, who you can be honest with, who you can practice some of these skills with, who will say when you ask them, you know what, Rachel, that doesn't work. That's not a good plan for you. I don't see you there. And you can do whatever you want with the advice, but you certainly want to get advice in an environment where the people you're talking to care what happens to you. This is not meant to be, the most formal board meeting where people are trying to punch holes in your P&L. These are people who know you, who want the best for you, who can give you some insight and maybe see you in ways that you can't see yourself. And it's an ongoing process. So I encourage you to experiment, reflect, change things that aren't working. I feel like I do this on a daily basis to figure out how you're going to get to the place that it is that you want to. And as I talked at the beginning, your yellow brick road might not get you to the place that you want, and it might be a different place. But in my mind, you should always have the place you're trying to get to and be building the steps and the plans and the skills to get there. And you might not get all the way there, but with a vision and with the focus and with an effort, you'll certainly get closer than you will if you don't have any of those things. So I would love to take questions and hear from people, things they agree with, they don't agree with, experiences they had that suggest that there are many, many other takeaways to help build and grow your career.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. What a great presentation. I think everybody it resonated with a lot of people. And so everyone, I already see a few of you dropping them in there, but you can head to the Q&A to leave your questions. As a reminder, you can leave them as yourself or anonymously, so don't be afraid to ask what comes to mind. But let's jump right in. We have a question from Casey here. She asks, can you talk more about the negotiation skills you picked up when you raised money for your company?
Sure. I hadn't taken my own advice at the time. What I had done is I was very prepared. I knew my business backwards and forwards. I knew the numbers. I knew our growth plans. What I hadn't prepared for was the sort of imbalance of the power dynamic. So I thought, I came in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, that I'm giving them this opportunity, which I still believe, to invest in something that changes women's lives. We would get letters from people, this stuff really works, thank you, God. And when my kids would cry, when I would leave the house to go on a business trip, I would say, don't worry, mommy's out doing God's work. This really had the ability to change people's lives. We got letters, my husband is smiling, I had my first orgasm in 22 years, it saved my marriage. So I really believed that we were trying to build a partnership. What I learned in those negotiating strategies is that not everybody believes in that win-win. And so you have to figure out in those situations what you are willing to give up. And so we had negotiations. I remember we had the night before we were going to sign a term sheet, and they added one term that we didn't think that we could live with, that we didn't think would motivate the team, that we didn't think would accelerate our growth. And we just said, you know what? We can't do that. And we put our foot down, and in that case, it worked. So we got to a set of terms. The challenge, I would say, is often the experience can be unpleasant because it doesn't feel collaborative. And a lot of people don't walk in with that attitude. I feel like when you're negotiating, it's like an aerobic sport. You know, it's like war games and strategy. And what are they going to say when I'm going to say? So I make it sort of a game in my head. But you also have to be very prepared that the person sitting across the table from you will not have the same idea that you do. That doesn't mean you can't get there, but what it does often mean is that it doesn't feel as good in the pit of your stomach. You know, if you had investor A put this arduous term in the final hours, I probably would have felt better about our working relationship than I do now. And I always think of negotiation, your objective is it's transactional, but it is not the only transaction that you're likely to have with that person. So I always feel like make sure you behave in a way that you're comfortable with and that you can live with. And if there's things you can't live with, you walk away.
Yeah. Casey summed it up here saying, you know, we just need to get over the need to have every moment feel perfectly pleasant then, you know.
I think that's so important. I don't know how many of you saw Brene Brown, her Netflix series, but she said this amazing line that I think about all the time. And in this idea of continuous learning, I listened to this last year, and she has this line where she says, if you don't feel uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough. And I thought, what a great way to of your stomach for good. And that happened to me. I was invited to a march, a protest. And I'm, you know, more of the gray hair in the space, and a lot of people who work in sexual health, you know, are in their early 30s. I was invited to a protest on an issue that I had been writing about for over a decade, which was the fact that Facebook had disparate standards that they were applying to men and women's advertising. So I literally am driving into this. I live outside. Normally, I live outside New York City, and I'm driving into the city. And the night before, I'm like, what do I wear to a protest? Like, this really feels uncomfortable. And I remember saying to myself, I feel sufficiently uncomfortable that I am definitely doing the right thing. And there were chants during the course of the protest that I was comfortable with. And so I jumped in. And, you know, hey ho, Facebook standards must go. And then there were ones that were much more sexual in nature that I wasn't comfortable with. And so I didn't participate in those. But I remember specifically thinking, you're going to this protest, whether this is not, you know, what do you wear to a protest? You know, I figure a black dress will take you anywhere. You know, and I'm with people who, I tend to be one of those people who still gets dressed up for work. But there were parts of that made me uncomfortable that I participated in, and there are parts that didn't make me comfortable. And you know what? You don't die from discomfort.
No, we had a speaker recently who said, and forgive me, whoever the speaker is, for forgetting who this was, but they said you learn a lot in your discomfort. That's where you sometimes learn the most. So I think that was really great advice and a great story as well. It's really funny. I see a comment in the chat. Yes, everybody will get the recording by the end of today. So don't worry about that. We have a great question from Elizabeth here. What suggestions can you provide for someone who has to rebound from failure, not to like sit in that failure and wallow in it, but how to get back up and strategize, plan, and move forward from it?
So this is very personal, and it's very hard. My advice is that you define the amount of time that you're going to wallow and mourn what happened. If it's a day, if it's a week, it's a month. But you have to say, I don't need to feel better now, but at this date, at this moment in time, I am done with inactivity, you know, eating pound cake out of the freezer, staying in bed with cover pulled over my head. But I do think it's very important to mourn. Every time failure comes up, I'm always amazed when people say, oh, failure's great. Failure is a great learning experience. Failure isn't a great feeling. So acknowledge that you're mourning something, whether it's the demise of your company or a relationship, whatever it is. And then literally have a list of things that you will do that will make you feel better. And so for me, it's laughing with my family, it's exercise, it's watching classic comedies or any 1 hour drama set in a hospital or in Chicago where there are intense personal relationships. I need things to get me out of my own brain. So when I tried yoga, I had to do hot yoga because when I was doing regular yoga, my mind was still racing. So I feel like you need to find activities that help you reset. And literally, failing could be an emotional and physical experience. And so where I start is you can't tell your brain when to stop feeling things, but you can get your body going. You can get your brain thinking about other things. You can get distracted. So the most important thing is I never shorten the mourning process. Unless obviously you have to, if you're a firefighter, you don't have time to, stay in bed if that's your job. So I'm saying within reason, find a period of time and then say, okay, Rachel, now you're done. You can wallow, you can cry, you can complain, you can scream, you can do lots of unproductive things, which ultimately those don't help you, I don't think, get past it. And then you get up and say, here's my plan. And the other piece is really be kind to yourself. I've had experiences with failure where literally you feel like the wind is knocked out of you and you don't know how you're going to regroup in whatever part of your life you need to regroup. The only way is to take a step forward, to take some step every day towards feeling better, towards getting back on track, towards getting where you want to go.
Yeah, that's truly great advice. And it goes back to what you were saying before about being uncomfortable. Not every situation is going to be comfortable. Failure certainly isn't, but you learn a lot in those moments. And if you're never failing and you're constantly sitting in a circle of comfort, well, maybe you're not pushing yourself enough to, achieve what you're trying to achieve. So it's really great advice. We have two questions here, both from anonymous attendees, but they touch on very similar topics. So I'm going to group them together. Both attendees are re-entering the workforce after some sort of career break. One is asking, how do you find your voice when you're trying to get back into the workplace? I feel like I've lost it a bit. And the second attendee is also asking, how do I market myself when I'm trying to compete with younger candidates?
What I have seen during COVID is that personal relationships matter even more. I have seen clients reach out to me that I haven't worked for or with in years. So here's my advice. Reach out to people and ask them for something very specific. And there's a part of the question here that says, without alienating the other person. What's the worst that can happen? You don't die from discomfort. You don't die from alienation. If someone is so put off by you asking for 15 minutes of their time, that's not about you. That's probably about them. So my advice is, LinkedIn is an unbelievable resource. Look for people in your industry, read what they're writing, follow what they follow, reach out to them and ask for something specific. And I've had this conversation with my husband a million times. So he'll send an email, do you have 15 minutes to brainstorm? And I would never send an email like that because I think that makes the person at the other end have to work too hard. It works for him. People do respond. But for me, I feel like that makes people have to work too hard as to what I'm asking for. So if you're in the middle of a job search, ask someone who's doing the job that you want. Do you have 15 minutes? I saw that your last role at Johnson & Johnson had you in the innovation group. Would you be willing to spend 15 minutes? Oh, by the way, we have these 17 connections in common. So I would take advantage of take advantage probably doesn't make people feel good. Capitalize on personal relationships and just ask. The answer could be no. I go to the other extreme. I'm constantly offering, especially my kids and their friends, and I get resumes by the boatload, and I deserve it because I said I would do it. But the difference is, I find, is that the follow-up, and I've said this before, is the most critical. I have a strategy with clients who I'm waiting to hear from. I'll email them once a week till they tell me to shut up, or they say we want to buy it, or they say we never want to speak to you. And it's really usually never an extreme. The worst that someone will think with aggressive follow-up is that you're interested. You know, you might be putting it on, projecting that if you feel desperate, you think they'll see your desperation. So it has to do with how you feel. And in these times, you know, lots of people feel desperate about getting jobs. You know, it's scary. It's scary what's going on right now. But again, take this as an activity and a goal. If you are looking for a job, set a goal. I'm going to reach out to 5 people on LinkedIn every day with the hopes of setting up 2 calls a week. I'm making up these metrics, and it doesn't quite matter what they are. But hold yourself accountable to the things that you're going to do. And
Yeah.
I've asked plenty of times, and people have said no, and I've been asked, and I've said no. You can say no in a nice way. You can say no in a jerky way. I tend not to go back to those people who said it in a jerky way. Forget that's the technical business term. They ask in a jerky way. But the language that the person used that alienating the other person, that's something you're concerned about. It might mean nothing to the other person. They might be too busy. They might be in the middle of a board meeting. They might have a child who's sick. And the reason I say all these things is literally just yesterday, someone had reached out to me. We want you to present at an event. Are you interested? And I said, sure. It was something I was interested in. Let's talk next week. She had found me. I didn't hear. I email her and I say, listen, wanted to touch base to discuss this if you still want to talk about the opportunity, which was business for me. And she wrote back, and she's having surgery. I'm really interested. Can we talk next week? And if I had stood on ceremony and felt like I was being too aggressive, I might have missed the opportunity to talk about the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. We're just out of time. I see a few questions that we didn't get to. I'd encourage you to drop them in the Fairygodboss feed. We have millions of women on there who are eager to help you, have gone through it or are going through it now, and can definitely offer their advice. Also, Rachel, people are looking for recommendations on books, podcasts, anything about leadership voice, finding confidence, negotiation. So we can connect after this and get some resources that I'll include in the follow-up email, along with all of this great contact info that you're seeing on your screen now. So Rachel, if you have any closing thoughts, I'd love to hear them, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity again to be here and interact with so many of you. And if there's anything that I said that's valuable and you want to have a conversation, please do reach out. Tell me that we met at the Fairygodboss webinar. And if there's anything that I've learned that might be helpful to someone else, I really am a big believer in, pay it forward. And I always learn as well. So I appreciate that. I'm thrilled to be part of the Fairygodboss community, and I look forward to continuing conversations.
Amazing. Thank you again so much, Rachel. And thank you everybody for spending the last hour with us. We will catch you at the next webinar. Bye.